for coming out today on this very hot day to hear a great discussion. My name is Ramsen Yousif, and I am a Policy Research Assistant at Social Plan Toronto, so it's a great pleasure to welcome you and be part of this discussion as your moderator for today. And we're really excited to have put this panel together, and first of all, a very big thank you to our panelists that have taken time out of their busy schedule to come together to discuss with you this very important topic, so thank you very much. Before I begin, just some helpful points, just so you feel more comfortable for today. If you haven't noticed, the washrooms are located on the back right. There's food also located with water and drinks. If you signed up for accommodation to receive tokens, we'll be providing them at the end, so just wait up to the end, and Rebecca will be handing them out at the back. Also, where is Rebecca? Rebecca's right there. So Rebecca's going to be taking pictures during the event and tweeting the event. If you guys don't want your picture taken, if you can just raise your hand now, and then Rebecca can avoid you. Okay, great. So Rebecca will avoid you guys during that. So first of all, I'd like to survey the audience and just get an idea of who's here today, and I see a lot of youth, which is great. Is there any youth workers in the audience? I guess just raise your hand. Okay, a lot. That's great. That's great. And okay, is there anyone else from the media here? Yes. Okay, great. So for those of you who are not familiar with SPT, we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan research and planning-based organization. We're committed to promoting civic engagement across Toronto. For years, we have provided community-tailored civic literacy training workshops and research education materials to increase civic engagement. Knowledge of government roles and voter participation rates among youth and newcomers, as well as Aboriginal and racialized community members, as well as individuals living with low income. This initiative has reached over 200,000 people, and we are very happy to continue this work. Recently, we have completed our annual federal election fact sheet series, which you guys probably have a copy. And it consists of education materials on various categories such as childcare, affordable housing, income security, and more. So we will post these series online shortly, and they will be also translated in multiple languages. So we encourage you guys to share that with your base. Youth workers, please share that. Also, just to give you guys a heads up, if people do come in, we may have some more people coming in, so just heads up for that. So let's begin. So I'm very excited again to introduce our distinguished panel for today. We couldn't have asked for a better panel. I will briefly introduce the panelists, and each will speak for about 15 minutes. Afterwards, we're going to encourage participants, you guys, the audience, to make use of the diversity of representation and opinions assembled for the session to propose constructive ideas that may form part of a larger strategy to address this issue. So again, feel free to share what type of work you are doing around civic engagement, youth civic engagement, any helpful advice on how we can engage youth, and we're looking to wrap up before 4 p.m. Again, we encourage you to stick around afterwards to network and share ideas amongst people. That way we can get a good turnout for this election. So Laura will be speaking first, and followed by Arjun, and then Likwa. So if Laura can start now, and we have 15 minutes for each panelist, and followed by that again is the Q&As. Thank you. Stages of Samara's research. First, from the conceptualization of an idea to conducting research and to statistic analysis, to crafting the final report. Prior to joining Samara, Laura worked in market research and held various positions at the University of Western Ontario and the Student Vote. She's currently working on Youth Civic Engagement's program, Democracy 360, and she's also a graduate of University of Toronto. Laura joined Samara in 2012. So Laura, please.
Hi everyone, thanks for having me here today. It's quite exciting to see a room full, given the heat in the middle of summer, so that's great. Just for those of you that don't know anything about Samara, we're a non-partisan charity that focuses on federal politics in Canada and how to really connect citizens back to the political process. So we spend a lot of time thinking about democracy in Canada, in particular how Canadians participate, what they think of MPs, and the role of political parties. So just to get a sense in the room, how many of you voted in 2011 federal election? Okay, so you're not a sample of the rest of Canada. How many of you plan to vote this fall? That's very exciting. Okay, great. So we're done here. So as many of you know, the problem and why we're actually here today is that in the 2011 federal election, only 2 in 5 young people actually cast a ballot. So the question is, why is that, and what can we do about it? So I think my role today is to really kind of set the foundation of what we understand about youth participation and the barriers towards it, and then the other panelists will build on that. So I think the first step, so actually I'm going to talk about 5 key aspects of youth engagement today. So the first is going to be to understand how youth actually are participating. So when we look beyond turnout, there's kind of a good news story. The second is to go over the barriers to youth participation. The third is the very important point is that youth aren't all the same person. They're different. And then lastly, I'll go over effective forms of engagement and mobilization techniques for those of you that are actually in the field. And then finally, I'll talk a bit about whose responsibility to increase turnout this year. And if I have time, or maybe I can get to the end, what Samara is actually doing this election with our Everyday Political Citizen Project and Vote Pop-Ups, which has anyone in the room heard of Vote Pop-Ups or the Everyday Political Citizen Project? Okay, great. So the first step is really, I think, is to kind of change the narrative around how youth are participating. So in a new research report that Samara is going to put out this fall, but we did one lightweights in 2012 that had a very similar finding. So we looked at 18 different ways that Canadians participate beyond voting. So you should have a handout on your chair that looks something like this. Yeah, so when we actually asked, we surveyed over 2,000 Canadians and we asked them. And what we found is that those under 30, across all the categories, are participating at a rate that's actually 11% higher than either other of the older generations. So the problem really becomes, how do we translate this engagement to casting a ballot, which we know that they're not doing. So how many of you in the room have done at least one of these forms of participation? I mean, you're all here, so I guess you've all attended a political meeting or event. How many of you have done more than 5? Okay. So what we found, actually, is 5 is the average. So if you ask Canadians across the country, the average number that most people are doing is 5. But youth, those under 30, are actually doing 6 out of 20. So again, youth are participating. It's just this voting thing where things are starting to fall apart. But actually, what the Samara 360 found earlier this year is that youth aren't the only ones that are kind of disillusioned with the political process, right? We hear this from Canadians across the country. They don't think their political leaders are trustworthy. They don't think they're influential in Ottawa. And they don't really see politics having a role in their everyday lives. So only 31% of Canadians actually believe that politics matters to them every day, which is kind of weird, you know, because every day we're walking on sidewalks, we're turning on our taps, we're taking public transit, and yet people aren't really connecting these issues to what's happening in Ottawa or in their provincial jurisdictions or at the city level. So really that's a problem, I think, when it comes to youth engagement, and it's not just youth that we're dealing with, right? There's kind of a problem that's across all generations. So when you look at the literature, not to be too boring or too much of a political scientist, there's 2 main reasons why youth aren't participating. The first is there's access barriers. So what this kind of looks like is, I didn't know how to vote, I didn't know where to vote, I didn't have time to vote. So these are kind of those, not excuses, but those justifications. And the second, which as youth outreach workers is a bit more of a challenge to kind of overcome, are the motivational barriers. So I didn't think my vote would matter. I don't really care. Politics isn't interest to me. Like, what's the point? And when we're looking at how to really engage youth, you have to keep in mind both of these considerations. And the latter is much harder, and what we really try to address with our work at Samara. So the third thing I kind of want to highlight is that youth aren't all the same. People millennial this, millennial that. Is anyone else sick of it? Because I'm sick of it. And especially when it comes to youth outreach, you can't have one outreach that can target every single youth, right? Just like Canadians across the country, youth are different. They come when it comes to Canadians across the board. So what we found, actually, is that only 60%, or over 60% of Canadians think that political parties are only interested in their votes, not their opinions. So it's kind of a problem. And when it comes to election year, of course, all of our energies are focused on how to increase turnout. But the bigger problem is, what does political participation look like between those 4 years, right? Because simply going to the ballot box once every 4 years isn't a significant amount of engagement, and it's not what people really feel is important anymore. People would rather tweet about an issue or go protest or sign a petition, something that's a bit more instant. So it's really, how do we strengthen that bond between what we're doing and the political system between those 4 years. The other way that you can focus on participation, and this is what's probably going to be most popular this year, are mobilization techniques. So these are often called get out the vote, or how to increase voter turnout. If everyone's heard of like get out the vote techniques. Yeah, so there should actually be a sheet that you also have called Mobilization Matters. So a few years ago, I did a study with Elections Canada, and we looked at 5 different countries and how political parties and politicians were actually outreaching to youth, and what was most effective. So when it comes to actually trying to get people to a ballot box, simply asking them to do so matters, and it has an effect. But how you ask them has a different impact. So the most effective way to get them to the ballot box is to ask them face to face. Do you plan on voting? Are you voting? Who are you voting for? You don't even need to ask them who they're voting for, but just simply, are you going to cast a ballot? Can increase people's, and youth included, political participation. And there's other ways. So parties also go door to door, which is face to face, but they send campaign literature through the mail. They can send emails. One interesting study that was focused on youth was text messages. So for youth that received text messages in an election, I think it was in the UK, I do believe, but I can't remember off the top of my head, 18% higher turnout if they received a text message to vote, right? So that's huge. And I think what's going to happen, as text messages becomes more popular, it's going to kind of be email. Right now, your email inbox, like there's too much going on there, it's too much noise. But when you get a text message, you really kind of register it. Oh, this is kind of a bit more personal. So text messages right now, anyways, in advance of the 2015 election, could be a powerful way to actually remind people on election day, hey, have you cast your ballot yet? What do you plan to do? Yeah, so when it comes to this fall, and this is something that at Samara we're interested in, I'm interested to hear everyone's thoughts in the audience today. Whose responsibility is it to focus on youth engagement? So all of us are in the room today and we're discussing it, and that's great. But who else has a responsibility? And I really think it really falls on everyone's shoulders to address this problem. So we can kind of, I guess there's 3 different ways that you can look at it. There's political parties and MPs, community organizations, youth themselves, because they should be part of the solution, and as everyone in the room here. So in the report that we're talking about this fall, Samara's releasing, we really think that political parties are in the best position to outreach to youth and have a national youth outreach strategy. They're national organizations, millions of dollars of public money. So I did a quick analysis before I came here today. And in the 42nd election this fall, parties and candidates can spend up to $65 million this election. But when we look at how they're actually spending that money, it's kind of tough to see how much are they spending on youth outreach. Where is that money going? So right now you can only see, are they spending it on advertising, polling, you can't really see, but I think at this juncture, it's fair for us and those that are interested in this problem to really ask, what are our parties doing to fix this problem? Because what's happening now is that youth aren't voting, so parties don't care about them. And it's becoming a vicious circle of then youth feel that parties don't care about them, and they don't because they're not voting, and then we can see how we're getting into this problem of no one's contacting each other. And those mobilization techniques that I talked about, they're not being used, right? Because youth aren't even showing up, so parties aren't using those contact methods on them. The other are community organizations that I think many of you in the room are a part of. So what at Samara we found is that these types of organizations can be very powerful and bringing disengaged groups to the table. So we have a program called Democracy Talks, and we did a program evaluation at North York Community House. And what we found is simply holding roundtable discussions and getting people to talk about politics statistically significantly increased our rates of political interest and political knowledge. And these are the two precursors to casting a ballot. If you don't have interest or knowledge of the process, your chances of actually going to vote are much less likely. So really just getting people in a room and talking to their peers about what's important to them can really matter. And I'm happy to talk about that program and what the results were. So I think if you're a part of a community organization, the benefit of that is that you're trusted, right? People don't look to you as other politicians or someone that's just trying to get them to vote. You're a trusted intermediary between citizens and the political process. So if you're part of an organization, remember that you have that power and you have that connection that parties would literally pay thousands of dollars for, but they just can't establish. So like I said before, I think that you also need to be a part of the solution. We can't force them to do something that they don't want to. So we can lend them these tricks and we can get them almost to the ballot box, but unless that they have some motivation themselves, we're not going to get anywhere. And I think it's okay to really tell youth that we can fix this problem so far, but at the end of the day, it's your choice. And then lastly, what can you guys in the room do today? So when you leave here, what are the takeaway tips that you can use? So I want you to remember that social pressure is very important. So if you ask someone to participate, they're likely to do so. Just of how we are as human beings, we like to be like other people and we want to do what we think is socially accepted. So if you ask your friends, have they thought about voting in the election? Talk to them about why they think it's important. Or even actually, if you live in the same polling place as a friend, make a plan to vote with them. Right? Be like, let's go after work, let's go do this, and then afterwards we can go get beers, or we can go out for dinner. Or we can go play sports. So it's a social activity. What we're finding in the research is that this social aspect of politics is very important. And then the last thing I want to mention, and I can talk about this more later, is Samara's 2 outreach programs for this election. The first is Everyday Political Citizen. And so what we found is that when people feel valued for what they're doing, they're more likely to do it. So we started the Everyday Political Citizen project to really celebrate Canadians across the country that are actually helping our political life, and in big and small ways. So this looks like the friend that always is talking about politics and doesn't let you not care, or the person in your riding that's always asking you to volunteer and come out to the local event, or your friend that's always reading political news and telling everyone about it. So these people, even though they're not involved with the party and they're not politicians, we're really trying to celebrate their behavior as everyday political citizens. We have a prize at the end of the year, and there's a few famous Canadians on the jury. So I'm happy to talk about what that looks like to the rest of you. And the other program that we're doing is Vote Pop-Ups. So what's happening? What's a Vote Pop-Up? It's a weird name, I know. We're actually getting people to practice the art of voting in their local communities. So we've gotten official materials from Elections Canada, and people get to go through the process of what ID do I actually need? How do I cast a ballot? What is it, a circle? Is it a check mark? Is it an X? What is it? Because I remember the first time I went to vote, I was a political science student at the time, I was like, this is kind of confusing. So we're trying to help people get through that process and make it easy as possible for them. Okay, so thank you, and I'm happy to talk about this afterwards today.